Maplebridge, a quiet little town in the south of England, was the kind of place where time seemed to pass more slowly than anywhere else. There, white fences were still repainted every spring, wild daisies bloomed along the roadside, and the soft chime of the ice cream truck could be heard every Saturday afternoon. On an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, just like any other, 7-year-old Clara Whitmore, wearing her favorite pale pink floral dress, stood in front of house number 18 on Willow Lane. Her eyes followed the movements of a middle-aged man dragging a large bin toward the truck parked at the end of the street. "Mummy?" Clara tugged gently on the sleeve of the woman arranging flowers in the yard. "Can I invite him to my birthday tomorrow?" Elizabeth Whitmore paused for a moment. The man, Mr. Edmund Harris, had been collecting garbage along this route for nearly 8 years. Polite, punctual, always offering a gentle smile when greeted. And yet, she realized, neither she nor anyone else in the neighborhood had ever stopped to ask his name. "He might be very busy, darling. Grown-ups have lots of work," Elizabeth said, hesitating slightly. Her voice lacked its usual certainty. "But you said everyone needs a friend." Clara said it as if it were an unshakable truth. Elizabeth looked at her daughter, those bright, innocent eyes untouched by prejudice, and found herself unable to refuse. "All right, but remember to ask nicely. Okay?" Clara nodded and ran toward Mr. Harris with all the determined energy of a child on a mission. Mr. Harris, a slightly stooped man with silver-streaked hair and keen eyes, turned around when he heard tiny footsteps crunching on the gravel. "Hello, Mr. Harris," Clara called out cheerfully. "I'd like to invite you to my birthday party tomorrow. There'll be cake, games, and music too." He looked surprised. It had been a long time since anyone had called him by name. Longer still since anyone had invited him to a birthday party. He let out a soft, raspy chuckle, warm and genuine. "Well now, Miss Clara, that's the finest invitation I've ever received. Will you come?" He hesitated for just a moment. A brief silence, but long enough for Clara to notice a flicker of sadness pass through his eyes. Then he nodded. "I'll do my very best." Clara beamed as though she had just won the lottery. From afar, Elizabeth watched the exchange. She saw Mr. Harris give her a small, respectful nod. She nodded back, and for the first time in many years, she looked at him not as the garbage man, but as a real person, with a name and a soul. That day, the breeze felt softer, the sunlight gentler, or perhaps, just perhaps, hearts were beginning to shift. The next morning, house number 18 was filled with the smell of buttery pastries and the sound of giggles. Pastel-colored balloons swayed in the breeze. Clara had woken up earlier than usual, wearing a paper crown made by her mother, running around the yard like a little princess awaiting a fairy's blessing. At the fence, Mrs. Ingrid, the neighbor on the left, whispered to her husband as she spotted the sign that read, "Welcome to Clara's birthday party," hanging high. "She invited Mr. Harris, you know. I heard Elizabeth say so last night." Her husband looked up from his newspaper, frowning. "Him? To a birthday party? Smelling like garbage? Shoo!" Mrs. Ingrid glanced toward number 18. "The girl likes him, and he's always been kind." Such murmurs weren't uncommon. In Maplebridge, adults often spoke with glances and polite half-smiles. A child like Clara didn't understand, but Elizabeth heard it all. As the party time drew closer, Clara grew increasingly anxious. Her eyes kept darting to the wooden gate, where a very special guest was expected to appear. "He's coming, right, Mummy?" she asked for the 4th time. Elizabeth smiled and gently squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "I hope so, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups have reasons they can't make it." Birthday music played, the cake was cut, and children cheered. But Clara's gaze remained fixed on the cobbled path outside the gate. And then, an old navy blue hatchback slowly pulled up in front of the house. No shiny black car, no bodyguards. Just one tall man stepping out, holding 2 neatly wrapped gifts. One big, one small. Mr. Harris wore a simple white shirt, cream-colored trousers, and clean, though worn, shoes. His hair was neatly combed, and in his eyes, a genuine smile, tinged with nervousness. A strange hush fell over the garden. The parents stopped chatting. Children stared curiously. But Clara didn't hesitate. She ran to him and hugged him tightly. "You really came. A promise is a promise, princess." He smiled, handing her the gifts. Elizabeth stepped forward. For the first time, she offered her hand first. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd be free. I made time," he said, shaking her hand gently. "It's not every day one receives such a special invitation." The party carried on, but the mood had changed. Some parents kept their distance at first, but gradually, as they saw Mr. Harris laughing with the children, playing ring toss and telling stories, their expressions softened. Eventually, Mr. Charles Bennet, the father of another child and a local businessman, approached him. "I don't think we've met before. You're in Waste Collection." Mr. Harris didn't flinch, nor did he boast. He simply nodded. "Yes, I've worked the southern route for 6 years now. Before that, I ran a small tech company in London." "Really? Really? After my wife passed away, I left that world behind. I needed something more grounded. A modest job, but it gave me peace." Charles was silent for a moment. He wanted to ask more, but instead, just gave a quiet nod. As night fell, Clara sat by her birthday cake, beside Mr. Harris and the gifts he had brought. A hand-bound fairy tale book and a wooden model of a village. "I love them," Clara whispered. "So do I, you know. Thank you for inviting me." She looked up at him and said, quite naturally, "Don't be invisible anymore. Okay?" Mr. Harris laughed. A real laugh. Not polite, not guarded. A laugh that came from somewhere deep within, newly mended. And that night, in Maplebridge, for the first time, no one called him the garbage man. They called him Mr. Edmund Harris, the man who stepped into a little girl's heart and helped an entire neighborhood see with new eyes. The next morning, house number 18 was filled with the warm scent of buttered pastries and the sound of soft giggles. Pastel-colored balloons swayed gently in the breeze. Clara had woken earlier than usual, wearing the paper crown her mother had made, running around the yard like a little princess awaiting a fairy's blessing. By the fence, Mrs. Ingrid, the neighbor to the left, whispered to her husband as she spotted the sign hanging high that read, "Welcome to Clara's birthday." She even invited Mr. Harris. "I heard Elizabeth say so last night." Her husband looked up from his newspaper and frowned. "Him? To a birthday party? Smelling like trash? Shoo." Mrs. Ingrid glanced toward number 18. "The little girl likes him. Besides, he's always been kind." Whispers like that weren't rare. In the town of Maplebridge, adults often spoke through glances and polite, tight smiles. A child like Clara didn't understand, but Elizabeth heard everything. As the party hour approached, Clara grew increasingly restless. She kept glancing toward the wooden gate where the special guest was expected to appear. "He'll come, right, Mummy?" she asked for the 4th time. Elizabeth smiled, gently resting her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I hope so, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups have reasons they can't come." Birthday music played. Cake was sliced. Children cheered. But Clara's eyes never left the cobbled path outside the gate. And then, a dark blue hatchback slowly rolled to a stop in front of the house. No sleek black car, no bodyguards. Just a tall man stepping out, holding 2 carefully wrapped boxes, one large, one small. Mr. Harris wore a simple white shirt, cream-colored khaki trousers, and clean, well-worn shoes. His hair was neatly combed. In his eyes, a genuine smile tinged with a hint of nervousness. A strange silence fell over the garden. The parents stopped talking. The children stared. But Clara didn't hesitate. She ran to Mr. Harris and threw her arms around him. "You really came. A promise is a promise, princess," he said with a laugh, placing the gift in her hands. Elizabeth walked over. For the first time, she extended her hand first. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd be free." "I made time," he replied, shaking her hand gently. One doesn't get an invitation like that every day. The party carried on, but something had shifted. A few parents kept their distance at first. But gradually, as they saw Mr. Harris laughing with the children, playing ring toss, and throwing his head back in joy, they began to look at him differently. Eventually, Mr. Charles Bennet, father to one of the children and a local businessman, walked over to chat. "I'm not sure we've met before. You work in Waste Collection." Mr. Harris didn't flinch, nor did he boast. He simply nodded. "Yes. I've been working the southern route for 6 years now. Before that, I ran a small tech company in London. Really? Really? After my wife passed away, I left that world. I needed something more grounded. A humble job, but it gave me peace. Charles fell quiet. He thought of asking more, but instead gave a slow, thoughtful nod. As night fell, Clara sat beside her birthday cake next to Mr. Harris and the gifts he had brought, a hand-bound fairy tale book and a wooden model of a small village. I love them, Clara whispered. So do I, you know? Thank you for inviting me. She looked up at him and said, quite naturally, don't be invisible anymore, okay? Mr. Harris laughed. A real laugh, not out of politeness or to deflect a question, but because something in his heart had started to heal. And that night, in Maplebridge, for the first time, people didn't call him the garbage man. They called him Mr. Edmund Harris, the man who stepped into a little girl's heart and made an entire neighborhood rethink the way it saw others. In the week following Clara's birthday party, something in Maplebridge felt different. Not the weather, but the way people looked. The greetings. The thank yous. On Monday morning, as the garbage truck rolled down Willow Lane as usual, Mrs. Ingrid, the same neighbor who once whispered behind her curtains, walked out with a steaming cup of coffee. Mr. Harris, it's chilly this morning. Have some to warm up. Mr. Edmund Harris paused for a moment. His eyes showed surprise, but he didn't refuse. Thank you. That's very kind. That cup of coffee became the start of a ripple. A tin of biscuits from Mrs. Jefferson. An invitation to rest on Mr. Paul's porch during break. Or simply a wave from the children on their way to school. Clara kept her own special routine. Every Wednesday after school, she left a hand-colored card in the mailbox slot beside the garbage bin, each one with the message. Thank you for keeping our street clean, from Clara. Elizabeth, Clara's mother, started to see the world differently too. She had once lived like a typical Maplebridge resident, polite, tidy, but quietly boxed into routine. Now she began asking questions of herself. One evening, while washing the dishes, she said to her husband, "Do you remember him saying he left a company after his wife died?" "Yeah, I think so. Do you ever wonder if we've forgotten that everyone has a story?" Her husband, a man not prone to deep thoughts, nodded for the first time, slowly. One afternoon, Clara and Mr. Edmund sat together on a park bench near her school. "Do you miss your wife?" Clara asked, as plainly and honestly as only a child could. Mr. Edmund wasn't surprised. He was used to Clara's directness, like a breeze that didn't know how to twist. "Very much. She was the only one brave enough to scold me when I forgot our anniversary." He chuckled, his gaze drifting far away. "She used to say, you're always busy with the big stuff, but you forget the tiny things that matter most." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Well, now you do the tiny things every day." He looked at her. Something heavy in his heart felt suddenly lighter. A week later, at a small Maplebridge Residents Committee meeting, something unprecedented happened. Mr. Edmund Harris was nominated for Unsung Contributor of the Year. Some frowned. A few smiled. But no one objected. Elizabeth stood up and spoke. "We live in a clean, orderly town, but are our hearts as clean?" A child noticed what we've overlooked for years: kindness wears no uniform. "I suggest we start learning that again." The room fell silent. Then, applause. Hesitant at first, then steady. Then loud. That night at house number 18, Clara was coloring a new sheet of paper, a drawing of Mr. Edmund wearing a cap, sitting in a garden of flowers, with the caption, "You're not invisible anymore. You are special." Elizabeth sat beside her and gently asked, "Do you think he's happy now?" Clara didn't look up, still focused on her coloring. "I don't know. But if he's not yet, we'll just keep being his friend." Elizabeth laughed softly. The answer was so simple it made her realize just how long she had overcomplicated everything. It was a quiet transformation, but a lasting one. Maplebridge didn't change overnight, but it began to open its eyes, thanks to a little girl who didn't know what prejudice was, and a man who once believed he had been forgotten. The week following Clara's birthday party, the town of Maplebridge seemed to carry a new kind of breeze. Not one brought by the weather, but by glances exchanged, greetings offered, and words of gratitude spoken aloud. On Monday morning, as the garbage truck rolled down Willow Lane like clockwork, Mrs. Ingrid, the same woman once known for whispering behind curtains, walked out with a steaming cup of coffee. "Mr. Harris, it's chilly this morning. Have this to warm up." Mr. Edmund Harris paused briefly, surprise flickering in his eyes, but he didn't refuse. "Thank you, ma'am. That warms more than just my hands." That cup of coffee marked the beginning of many small gestures. A tin of cookies from Mrs. Jefferson, an offer to rest on Mr. Paul's porch during break, or simply a cheerful wave from children walking to school. Clara kept her special habit. Every Wednesday afternoon after school, she slipped a handmade, hand-colored card into the mailbox beside the garbage bin. Each one read, "Thank you for keeping our street clean." From Clara. Elizabeth, Clara's mother, began to see the world through a different lens. She had lived like many in Maplebridge, polite, orderly, but enclosed in quiet routines. Now she started to question herself. One evening, while washing dishes, she turned to her husband and said, "Do you remember him saying he left his company after his wife passed?" "Yeah, I think so. Do you ever wonder if we've forgotten that everyone has a story?" Her husband, a man not fond of deep reflection, nodded slowly for the first time. One afternoon, Clara and Mr. Edmund sat on a park bench near her school. "Do you miss your wife?" Clara asked with the unfiltered honesty of a child. Mr. Edmund wasn't surprised. He was used to Clara's candor, as direct and refreshing as an untamed breeze. "Very much. She was the only one who ever dared scold me for forgetting our anniversary." He chuckled, eyes drifting to memories. "She once said, 'You're always chasing the big things, but you forget the little things that matter most.'" Clara was silent for a moment, then said, "Well, now you do little things every day." He looked at her, and something long heavy in his chest seemed to lift. A week later, during a small meeting of the Maplebridge Residents Committee, something unprecedented happened. Mr. Edmund Harris was nominated for Unsung Contributor of the Year. Some raised eyebrows, others smiled faintly, but no one objected. Elizabeth stood and spoke. "We live in a town that's clean and orderly, but are our hearts as tidy?" A child noticed what we've overlooked for years. Kindness doesn't wear a uniform. I suggest we start relearning that. The room fell into a hush. Then, slowly, applause began, scattered at first, then growing into a full, sustained round. That night at number 18, Clara colored a new page, an illustration of Mr. Edmund wearing a cap, sitting in a flower-filled yard. The caption read, "You're not invisible anymore. You are special." Elizabeth sat beside her and gently asked, "Do you think he's happy now?" Clara didn't look up, still focused on her drawing. "I don't know, but if he isn't yet, we'll just keep being his friend." Elizabeth smiled. The answer was so simple, it made her realize how unnecessarily complicated she'd made things for too long. It was a quiet transformation, but a true one. The town didn't change overnight, but it began to open its eyes, thanks to a little girl who didn't know what prejudice was, and a man who had once believed he'd been forgotten. 3 months in London passed like a strange wind. The city remained unchanged. Towering skyscrapers, endless meetings, weighty decisions, and the constant clicking of keyboards. But Edmund Harris had changed. He felt it within the first week. He had once lived in this world, commanding million-pound projects, occupying a glass-walled office on the 23rd floor, entering meetings trailed by 3 assistants. But now, every time he sat in a boardroom, he could hear Clara's laugh in his head, or see her tiny hands holding a handmade card. Amid spreadsheets and quarterly targets, a question kept returning to him. Have I ever seen a real person in any of these numbers? In one shareholder meeting, when a director proposed cutting the customer care team to optimize profit, Edmund didn't argue. He simply looked out the window at a street cleaner sweeping the sidewalk in the rain. He remembered how people used to look at him in his waste collection uniform, glancing past, offering no eye contact, no hello. Only Clara, only that child, had looked at him like he was truly there. The next morning, Edmund arrived early. He placed his office keys, mail, and a handwritten letter on the CEO's desk. I once believed the biggest things were the most valuable. I was wrong. I choose the small things, the ones that let me be seen, known, and thanked with a real smile. That afternoon, his old hatchback pulled out of London. No announcement, no fanfare, no farewell. Maplebridge welcomed him home with a gentle blue sky. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and sunlight danced on rooftops. He turned onto Willow Lane, his heart fluttering with a strange nervousness, the kind he'd last felt when proposing to his wife. And then he saw Clara. She stood at the head of the street, holding a bunch of wildflowers and a sign, scrawled in crayon. "Welcome back, Mr. Edmund." He stopped the car and stepped out. The wind tousled his hair slightly. Clara ran to him without a word and handed him the bouquet. "How did you know I was coming back today?" he asked, eyes misting. Clara shrugged, smiling. "I wasn't sure, but today's Wednesday. It's when you usually come." The simplicity of the answer made him laugh. A soft, emotional laugh, like a weight rolling off his chest after 3 long months. And Clara wasn't the only one who remembered. That morning, Edmund noticed something strange. Every house on Willow Lane had tidied up its front yard. Each bin had a note taped beside it. "Thank you, Mr. Edmund. We missed you. Welcome home." Mrs. Jefferson from number 12 brought out a basket of warm buttered scones, smiling kindly. "You're really back? I thought you'd left for good." "There were moments I thought so too," he replied. "But I realized, the place where you're invited to a birthday party is where you truly belong." Laughter broke out. Not the polite kind Maplebridge was known for, but the kind that comes from people who had once walked past him, now stopping to truly see him. That evening, Edmund was invited for tea at house number 18, the place where it had all begun. On the porch bathed in golden light, he sat with Clara and Elizabeth. Crickets chirped in the garden. The scent of mint drifted through the air. Elizabeth poured the tea and asked softly, "You've made your choice, haven't you?" Edmund nodded. He didn't need to explain. The answer was in his eyes, the kind of light no boardroom window could ever reflect. "I once built great things," he said, "but I never really saw them come alive. Here, with just one small invitation from Clara, I finally feel part of something real." Clara tilted her head and leaned against his shoulder, her voice like a bell. "Because you're not invisible anymore." He looked at her, the girl who changed him and changed an entire town, just by offering her kindness freely without condition. Edmund Harris now understood. Even without a title, without a high-rise office, without shareholders, he was seen, he was named, and he was welcomed back. Maplebridge had never been loud. But that night, under the porch light, something truly changed. A man reclaimed his worth, and a community slowly but surely learned how to open its heart. All because of one little girl, her hand-colored cards, and a heart that knew no prejudice. One crisp autumn morning, as the first leaves began to turn, Clara pinned a large piece of paper to the old oak tree in her front yard. "Class on Kindness, Saturday, 10 a.m., backyard of house number 18. Everyone's welcome. No need to bring anything, just bring a heart that's willing to listen." Elizabeth was about to say something, but when she saw the serious look in her daughter's eyes, she simply nodded in silence. Clara took the notice to the grocery store, the library, even the tea room, where elderly ladies often gathered to tell stories. Everyone looked at the little girl with a mix of curiosity and fondness. What's she up to this time? Edmund found out Friday afternoon. He was wheeling a garbage bin down the street when Clara ran up and handed him a small handmade card, decorated with a heart and carefully written words. "You'll be the first teacher, because you were the one who taught me to see people with real eyes." He held the card and said nothing. But the next day he arrived at exactly 9:30 a.m. carrying a wooden chair and an old pocket watch. That Saturday morning, the backyard of number 18 welcomed about 10 people, some children, a few curious parents, and Mrs. Jefferson holding a grape cake. They sat on wooden benches, picnic blankets, or simply on the grass. Clara stood in front, holding a stick like a tiny teacher. "Today's our first lesson on kindness. But I'm not the one teaching. Our teacher is Mr. Edmund Harris, who has been many things, but most importantly, a friend." All eyes turned to Edmund. He walked forward slowly, hands clasped behind his back. He looked at the group not as an audience, but as if they were old friends. "I don't have a lecture. Just a few stories." He spoke. No embellishment, no preaching. Just slices of life about a young intern he once helped as a CEO who years later helped arrange his wife's funeral. About a wealthy man who never greeted the security guard until one snowy day when he got lost and that very guard saved him. Then his voice softened. "We live beside each other, yet we so rarely see each other. Kindness doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts when you look someone in the eye and smile like they matter. Because they do. No one spoke for a moment. Only the rustle of leaves filled the silence. Mrs. Jefferson wiped her eyes. A young father placed his hand on his son's shoulder. The boy raised his hand. What if someone isn't kind to us? Edmund nodded gently. Then you have two choices. One is to react like them, let anger lead you. The other is to do the opposite, show them what kindness looks like. Whichever you choose, you'll learn something. Clara wrote it down on a small whiteboard. Kindness isn't about winning. It's about not becoming the worst part of someone else. The lesson ended not with a bell, but with hugs, shared stories, and promises to return next week. Maplebridge didn't become a magical town overnight. But that morning something shifted. People looked at each other a little slower, a little softer, a quiet sign that something was growing. Not from rules, but from a classroom with no blackboard, where a once invisible man became a guiding voice. And a 7-year-old girl became a spark for impossible change. Maplebridge had always been a quiet town, known for its neatly painted fences, gentle greetings, and routines no one questioned. People often said, nothing ever happens here, only seasons change. Then Mr. Lowell moved in. He lived alone in a long-abandoned house at the corner of Ash Street. No one knew much about him. He greeted no one, kept his curtains closed, and posted a no visitors sign on his gate from day one. Clara first saw him one Wednesday afternoon as she and her mother walked by with their bikes. Mr. Lowell was pulling a tarp over his fence, his expression stern, his face closed. When Clara smiled and waved, he merely glanced at her without replying. Maybe he's just tired, Clara said patiently. Elizabeth wasn't so sure. She sensed something different, less like Edmund's quiet past, more like a man who had built his own walls. The next day, when the kindness class gathered again in the backyard of number 18, Mr. Lowell became the topic of conversation. Some adults shook their heads. He doesn't like children. I left a cake at his door, he returned a note. I don't need kindness disturbing my sleep. Edmund said nothing at first, but as the session drew to a close, he stood. This is a chance for us to live what we've talked about. Not to change him, but to not lose ourselves. The group fell quiet. They had grown used to risk-free kindness given to those who welcomed it. But now, Clara raised her hand. I'd like to try. Elizabeth opened her mouth to stop her, but Edmund gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Let her do it her way. Monday morning, Clara stood at Mr. Lowell's gate. In her hands was a small wooden box she had made herself. Inside were a few tea bags, a hand-stitched handkerchief, and a note that read, I'm not here to bother you. I just want you to know you're not invisible. Clara. She knocked. No one answered. She placed the box on the step, stepped back, and before leaving, whispered, I'll come again next week if you'd like. A week passed. No one in town heard anything from Mr. Lowell. But during the 7th kindness class, Clara arrived a few minutes late, something almost unheard of. Sorry, she said, catching her breath. I just came from Mr. Lowell's house. Everyone turned toward her. Edmund tilted his head. Did he say anything? Clara nodded and held up a neatly folded note. On it was written, Thank you for not giving up. Next week, if you're still patient, I'll make tea. Lowell. The backyard seemed to hold its breath. Elizabeth covered her mouth. Mr. Paul chuckled. Well then, turns out this class does have tests. Edmund's eyes glinted behind his glasses. And the lesson is, the ones who need kindness the most are often the ones who make us want to give up the fastest. That night at house number 18, Clara made a new card. This time, no long message. Just a drawing of 2 teacups and a tiny caption. Saturday, 10 a.m. My backyard. Watching her, Edmund turned to Elizabeth. That little girl, she's not just opening others. She's teaching grown-ups like us how to trust again. Elizabeth smiled softly. And who knows, maybe Mr. Lowell will end up being this town's greatest lesson. Saturday morning. Light autumn sun spilled through a soft mist, turning Maplebridge golden, steps, grass, and the ever-familiar white fences. But today something felt different. The air was heavier, like someone had finally taken a deep breath after holding it for years. Clara wore a pink floral dress, her hair tied with white ribbons. In her hands was a small wooden tray with 2 white porcelain teacups decorated with orchids, one of her mother's treasured keepsakes. Elizabeth had once saved them for a more important occasion, but now she quietly brought them down. This is important enough, isn't it, Mum? Clara asked. More than I ever imagined, Elizabeth replied. At exactly 10 a.m., the backyard gate opens. Mr. Lowell stood there. No suit, no umbrella, no armor. Just a thin, silver-haired man in a pale gray shirt and worn leather shoes. In his hand, a small glass jar of honey. I figured, tea needs something warmer than sugar, he said, his voice low, gravelly, but gentler. Clara smiled. No jumping. No cheering. Just a nod as she held out her hand to invite him to sit across from her, where 2 steaming cups of tea waited. The backyard was quieter than any class before. No loud voices. No rush. Mr. Lowell and Clara sat across from each other. 2 cups of tea. A shared silence. Then, as if unable to hold it in any longer, Mr. Lowell began. I once lived in a crowded place where if you fell on the sidewalk, people stepped over you because they were too busy. When my wife died, no one asked if I was okay. When my son moved abroad, no one noticed. I became a blur in every window pane, a shadow. He paused, his eyes far away as though those memories were slowly lifting. Until you left a box of tea. You didn't tell me to get better. You didn't ask me to change. You just left a message, you're not invisible. He took a long breath. His voice cracked slightly. No one's ever said that to me. Not once. Clara said nothing. She simply poured more tea into his cup. A week later, at the final kindness class before winter, Mr. Lowell sat in the front row. No one was surprised. His presence now felt natural as if he had always been there. Edmund invited him to speak. Mr. Lowell stood, holding the familiar teacup. He looked into the eyes of each person, those who had once avoided him, once whispered behind his back. I'm not here to teach. Just to say thank you. And if I've learned anything, it's this. Some things can't force people to change, but they can make them want to. He looked at Clara. This little girl didn't give up on me. And I think that's why I'm still sitting here, among people. That day, Edmund closed the session with one final sentence. Kindness isn't a subject. It's a way of living. And sometimes it takes a child to remind us how to live it. Everyone stood and applauded not for a lesson but for what they had witnessed. A community learning to see, to slow down, to give each other another chance. Weeks later, winter laid its first snowy blanket over Maplebridge. Children built snowmen, adults shared hot tea and warm scones. Mr. Harris still rolled the garbage bins every Wednesday. But now someone always invited him in, asked how he was, told him a story. He was no longer the garbage man, he was part of the town's living tapestry. Mr. Lowell replanted his small garden. Every Saturday morning he made tea for 2, 1 cup for him, and 1 waiting quietly for a small visitor. And Clara, the 7-year-old with a heart as open as the sky, had quietly become the soul of Maplebridge. Not through medals or newspaper headlines, but through the way adults now looked at each other after every class. And the way a small town learned to slow down, to truly see one another.